January 30th, 1944. The night air over northern France trembles with the low hum of twin Merlins. Somewhere below, the darkened outline of Amiens prison fades beneath the clouds. Above, a small formation of de Havilland Mosquitoes slices through the black. Their wooden wings glisten faintly under the ghost light of a winter moon. The crews inside say little, only curt radio clicks, a nod, a breath held tight. At precisely 12:01 p.m., bombs whistle down, hitting their marks with surgical precision. Within minutes, the walls of the German-controlled prison collapse. Hundreds of French resistance captives run free through the smoke. In Berlin, German officers stare at reports with disbelief. How could a toy plane, made of plywood and glue, humiliate their defenses so completely? On that night, British engineers proved that ingenuity could be as deadly as firepower. What began as an experiment in scarcity, a desperate design born of limited metal and time, became a symbol of fear for the Luftwaffe. This is the story of how the Royal Air Force's wooden wonder turned the tables in the dark, becoming the Nazis' worst nightmare. When the Second World War erupted in 1939, the skies over Europe became the new front line. Air power would decide not only battles but the very survival of nations. Britain, isolated after the fall of France, faced the terrifying prospect of standing alone against the might of Nazi Germany. The Royal Air Force had endured the Blitz and held its own during the Battle of Britain. But as the war dragged on, its leaders faced a grim realization. They needed a new kind of aircraft. The Luftwaffe's defenses were tightening, radar was evolving, and the losses of slow, heavily armed bombers were becoming unsustainable. In the midst of this, one visionary engineer dared to defy convention, Geoffrey de Havilland. De Havilland's idea seemed absurd at first. While other aircraft builders competed to build bigger and heavier machines of aluminum and steel, he proposed the opposite: a lightweight, unarmed bomber built almost entirely of wood. In a time when Britain's factories strained under metal shortages, de Havilland's design promised to bypass those limitations entirely. Using birch plywood and balsa, materials more common in furniture workshops than aircraft hangars, he and his team envisioned a plane that could fly faster than anything the enemy possessed, simply by outrunning danger instead of fighting it. The design took shape inside the quiet halls of the de Havilland Aircraft Company in Hatfield, Hertfordshire. Engineers worked in secrecy, their drafts often dismissed by skeptics in the Air Ministry, who doubted the feasibility of such a fragile craft. Yet as the blueprints turned into prototypes, the impossible began to take form. The aircraft's smooth, wooden monocoque fuselage was both aerodynamic and incredibly strong. Every contour was designed to cheat the air, and the twin Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, already legends powering the Spitfire and Hurricane, gave it the speed to dance beyond pursuit. By 1941, the first prototype of the Mosquito, the DH-98, took flight. Those present at the Hatfield Aerodrome that November morning would never forget what they saw. The plane lifted off with effortless grace, accelerating across the runway like a dart released from a bow. At 382 miles per hour, it outpaced every fighter then in service, Allied or Axis. The doubters were silenced. The RAF suddenly had something extraordinary, a bomber so fast it didn't need guns. Initially, the Air Ministry struggled to find a role for it. Some officers considered it too unorthodox, too vulnerable. But Britain's war machine was changing. The nighttime raids over Germany were growing in scale, and precision was desperately needed. Heavy bombers like the Lancaster could drop thousands of pounds of explosives, but they could not pick out a single factory or headquarters with accuracy. The Mosquito offered exactly that, a fast, low-flying precision weapon that could strike where it hurt most. By late 1942, Mosquitoes were flying photographic reconnaissance missions deep over enemy territory, returning with images of astonishing clarity. They were soon used to mark targets for bomber streams, a dangerous role that demanded perfect timing and nerves of steel. Their success was immediate and dramatic. Crews began to realize that speed and agility were a defense of their own. The Germans, caught off guard by this strange wooden machine, nicknamed it der Holzsarg, the wooden coffin. Yet for every attempt to shoot it down, the Mosquito seemed to vanish into the clouds, unscathed and untouchable. Then came the expansion of roles. The Mosquito became a night fighter, an intruder, a pathfinder, a bomber, and even a high-altitude interceptor. Each variant carried with it the same fundamental principle: simplicity in construction, brilliance in execution. Built in furniture factories and piano workshops across Britain and Canada, its production became a triumph of improvisation. Carpenters, not aircraft assemblers, shaped its body. Housewives glued panels in home workshops. The war effort had become not only a battle of steel and oil, but one of creativity and resolve. Every new Mosquito that rolled off the line represented more than an aircraft. It was proof that ingenuity could overcome industrial limitation. Its success emboldened RAF Bomber Command to attempt missions once thought impossible. And as the war entered its most destructive years, the Mosquito would take its place not as a supplement to the bombers, but as their silent, swift guardian. What began as an act of engineering defiance was about to redefine how Britain fought in the dark skies over Europe. The next stage of the story would unfold not in design offices, but in the night itself, where technology, radar, and courage would collide in a new kind of war. By 1943, the air war over Europe had evolved into a deadly science. Night after night, streams of British bombers roared across the Channel, guided by moonlight, stars, and the fragile glow of instruments. For the crews, each mission was a gamble against radar, flak, and the relentless German night fighter force. The Luftwaffe's defense network, known as the Kammhuber Line, stretched across occupied Europe, an intricate system of radar stations, searchlights, and interceptor zones. Within this labyrinth, British bombers were hunted like shadows. But the Mosquito was built for this kind of war. Its very nature, a fast, low-signature wooden aircraft, made it nearly invisible to the radar sets designed to track heavier, slower metal bombers. British scientists were waging a parallel war, one fought in wavelengths and frequencies. The Mosquito became their weapon of choice in this invisible battle. It carried new technologies like oboe, a radio navigation system that allowed bombers to strike targets with uncanny accuracy. Using signals from ground stations in England, Mosquito crews could time their bomb drops within yards of the intended point, even through cloud and darkness. Soon after came window, thin strips of aluminum foil dropped from aircraft to confuse enemy radar. When Mosquitoes deployed it, the Luftwaffe's screens lit up with thousands of false echoes, leaving controllers blind. The combination of speed, stealth, and electronic warfare transformed the RAF's strategy. Mosquitoes began to lead the bomber streams, marking targets with colored flares so that the larger aircraft, Lancasters and Halifaxes, could follow their cues. These elite units became known as pathfinders. Flying ahead of the main force, their task was among the most perilous. One miscalculation, and they would find themselves alone, surrounded by flak and night fighters. Yet their precision turned chaos into coordination. Entire raids began to hinge on the accuracy of a single Mosquito's flare. Other units, designated as intruders, used the same aircraft for entirely different work. They hunted the hunters. Operating over German night fighter airfields, these Mosquito crews would lurk in the darkness, waiting for returning Bf-110s or Ju-88s to switch on their landing lights. In that fleeting moment of vulnerability, the British aircraft struck, guns blazing, then vanished back into the black sky. German pilots began to dread their own runways. Every takeoff, every landing became a risk. The intruder threat was psychological as much as physical, breaking the rhythm of the Luftwaffe's night defense. Meanwhile, the Mosquito's versatility continued to grow. In 1943, the RAF formed 100 Group, a specialist force devoted to electronic countermeasures and night fighter support. Their mission was to confuse, jam, and outthink the German radar network. Mosquitoes of 100 Group carried black boxes filled with mysterious dials and antennas, devices designed to intercept enemy transmissions, broadcast false signals, and mislead interceptors. They flew not only with bombs but with information. Every pulse of energy they emitted was part of a new kind of warfare, one where data could be as deadly as explosives. As these tactics matured, Bomber Command found in the Mosquito the key to precision. It could fly high, low, or anywhere in between. It could deliver pinpoint strikes on Gestapo headquarters, prisons, or rail hubs, often in daylight, often alone. One raid on Oslo, another on The Hague, proved that no occupied city was beyond reach. The psychological effect was immense. Nazi propaganda had called Britain's bombers clumsy and inaccurate. Now, a handful of wooden planes were proving them wrong, hitting within meters of their targets. The Reich's confidence began to crack. Behind the front lines, German engineers raced to develop countermeasures. New radars, Liechtenstein and Freya, were deployed, and night fighters were equipped with Schräge Musik, upward-firing cannons meant to ambush bombers from below. But none of it solved the Mosquito problem. It was too fast, too high, and too unpredictable. Hermann Göring himself is said to have raged at reports of yet another precision strike. "It makes me furious when I see the Mosquito. They have the nerve to fly here when our defenses are at their highest." By 1944, the Mosquito was more than a plane. It was a philosophy of warfare, a union of craftsmanship, science, and audacity. It represented what Britain did best under pressure: adapt, improvise, and innovate. The wooden plane had become a technological ghost in the night, defying logic and enemy detection alike. And as the Allies prepared for their greatest operations, from the bombing of Berlin to the build-up for D-Day, the Mosquito would stand at the center of it all, leading, guiding, and striking with precision that reshaped the war's very rhythm. The stage was set for the deeper story, the many faces of this aircraft and the men who flew it. The Mosquito was more than a machine of wood and metal. It was a fusion of human daring and technological brilliance. Every angle of its story reveals a different truth about the war, about ingenuity under fire, and about the people who placed their faith in speed and silence. Inside the cockpit, the Mosquito was a world of concentration and trust. Two men seated shoulder to shoulder shared everything: oxygen, sweat, fear, and resolve. The pilot, hands locked on the yoke, felt every vibration through the thin wooden skin. Beside him, the navigator watched the dim glow of instruments and the green pulse of radar screens. At 25,000 feet, frost traced patterns across the canopy, and the only sound was the steady thrum of twin Merlins slicing through the cold. These crews were among the most skilled and calm under pressure. They had to be. Flying at 350 to 400 miles per hour in darkness left no room for hesitation. They flew low enough to brush treetops or high enough to dodge radar cones, guided by instinct and training. Their missions demanded precision and courage. One error, and the aircraft would vanish into blackness without a trace. Yet what defined them was not recklessness but a quiet confidence. They knew they were flying one of the most remarkable aircraft ever built, and they trusted it with their lives. The Mosquito was never meant to fight conventionally. It rewrote the very rulebook of aerial warfare. Instead of overwhelming force, it relied on agility, speed, and precision. Mosquito squadrons developed tactics that baffled the Luftwaffe. Flying in pairs or alone, they struck at radar stations, rail lines, and command posts, always at night, always fast. Pathfinders marked targets for the heavy bombers with brilliant flares, their timing down to the second. Intruder units roamed behind enemy lines, slipping into the paths of German night fighters and disrupting their takeoffs and landings. The Mosquito's operations forced the Germans to scatter their defenses, burning precious fuel and manpower chasing ghosts. Some missions lasted hours, others mere minutes, but every sortie chipped away at the enemy's sense of security. The aircraft's ability to appear suddenly, strike, and vanish created an illusion of omnipresence. To the German radar operators, it seemed the sky itself had turned against them. The Mosquito's success was as much a story of science as of courage. Its wooden structure, once mocked, became its secret weapon. Radar waves of the early 1940s struggled to detect wood, giving the aircraft a kind of primitive stealth long before the concept existed. The construction process, using layers of birch and balsa bonded with casein glue, produced a fuselage that was both light and astonishingly durable. The de Havilland craftsmen turned traditional woodworking into aviation artistry, every panel sanded by hand, every curve shaped to exacting tolerances. Powered by two Rolls-Royce Merlin engines, the same heart that beat within the Spitfire, the Mosquito reached speeds of 415 miles per hour and climbed higher than most fighters could follow. Inside, cutting-edge instruments allowed crews to navigate and strike with precision. The integration of systems like oboe and H-2S radar turned the Mosquito into a flying laboratory of wartime innovation. Each mission tested new technologies, paving the way for future electronic warfare and precision-guided strikes. From the German side, the Mosquito was an enigma that defied explanation. Radar operators complained that blips appeared and vanished before they could lock on. Fighter controllers watched in frustration as their best aircraft, Bf-110s, Ju-88s, even Me-2622s later, failed to catch the elusive intruders. Luftwaffe reports from 1943 and 1944 reveal growing panic. They spoke of phantom raids, of bombers that struck without warning and disappeared before searchlights could find them. Cities like Berlin, Hamburg, and Cologne endured repeated Mosquito attacks, often at night, often symbolic rather than destructive, but always unnerving. The German public began to call them ghost bombers. Even the Reich's high command was not spared humiliation. In January 1943, Mosquitoes raided Berlin in daylight during a speech by Hermann Göring. The bombs fell as his words echoed in the hall, a calculated insult that infuriated him. "It makes me furious," he later fumed, "when I see the Mosquito. I turn green and yellow with envy. The British, who can afford aluminum, spare it and use wood instead." The irony was cruel and poetic. The mightiest air force in Europe haunted by a plane made in carpenters' shops. Each of these perspectives, human endurance, tactical mastery, technical genius, and enemy fear, formed the mosaic of the Mosquito's legend. It was a weapon that combined art with function, intellect with instinct. But the story doesn't end with admiration. Behind this brilliance lay leadership that understood its potential and pushed it to its limits, and a moral complexity that shadowed every bombing mission. The Mosquito's rise from an unapproved prototype to one of Britain's deadliest aircraft was not just a story of innovation, but of conviction. It took strong, visionary leadership to see beyond bureaucracy and tradition. Air Vice Marshal Don Bennett, head of the RAF Pathfinders, understood the aircraft's potential better than most. A perfectionist by nature, Bennett demanded precision in every operation. He believed in technology, discipline, and data, qualities that made the Mosquito his perfect tool. Under his leadership, the Pathfinder Force became the sharpest instrument in Bomber Command's arsenal. Missions were planned to the minute, routes calculated with mathematical precision. Crews trained relentlessly to drop target markers within a few seconds of their appointed times. Bennett's vision turned night bombing from blind area destruction into something resembling surgical warfare. Meanwhile, in Hatfield, Sir Geoffrey de Havilland and his engineers continued refining their creation. They worked quietly, methodically, unbothered by fanfare. Their challenge was not only to improve performance, but to adapt the Mosquito to an ever-expanding list of missions. They designed fighter bombers armed with 4 20mm Hispano cannons and 4 303 machine guns, a configuration that could tear through enemy trains, convoys, and aircraft alike. They fitted radar-equipped night fighters capable of intercepting V-1 flying bombs and German intruders over Britain. And as the war dragged on, they produced reconnaissance versions that photographed targets at 35,000 feet, often returning without escort. The leadership at de Havilland embodied wartime British pragmatism, quiet efficiency, steady progress, and an unshakable belief in the value of innovation over conformity. It was this leadership synergy, engineers and commanders aligned in purpose, that made the Mosquito more than an aircraft. It became a doctrine, a belief that speed, precision, and adaptability could overcome brute force. In an age dominated by massive bomber fleets and heavy armor, the Mosquito proved that intelligence could strike harder than size. It was a weapon that embodied a nation's character, resourceful, understated, and relentless. Yet beneath its triumph lay questions of conscience. The Mosquito blurred the line between necessity and morality. Unlike the heavy bombers that flattened cities, Mosquito raids often aimed for precision. They targeted Gestapo headquarters, communication hubs, or prisons holding resistance fighters. The results could be inspiring, like the Amiens raid that freed hundreds of captives, but also tragic. A single miscalculation could destroy civilians or allies alongside the enemy. The crews knew the stakes. Each mission carried not just the risk of death, but the weight of moral uncertainty. They were instruments of liberation and destruction at once. For the British public, the Mosquito symbolized a new kind of hope. Newspaper headlines celebrated its daring raids, its wooden body defying Nazi steel. It was proof that British ingenuity still held the edge. For those under German occupation, its sudden strikes brought whispers of defiance. To hear its engines at night meant resistance was alive. To the Germans, however, the psychological toll was immense. Sirens wailed in cities long considered safe. No one knew when or where the next Mosquito would appear. The aircraft's very presence disrupted sleep, work, and morale. It didn't just destroy, it haunted. Even within the RAF, the Mosquito stirred reflection. Some aircrews envied its speed and safety, while others questioned whether precision strikes could ever replace the devastating power of mass bombing. But history would later vindicate its philosophy. In an era obsessed with numbers, tons of bombs dropped, sorties flown, the Mosquito proved that accuracy and efficiency could achieve what brute strength could not. It foreshadowed the precision warfare of the modern age, decades before guided missiles and stealth aircraft. By the end of 1943, all these angles, human courage, tactical innovation, technological genius, enemy fear, and moral introspection, intersected in one truth. The Mosquito had changed the rhythm of the air war. Its raids were not the loud, apocalyptic infernos that reduced cities to ashes. They were swift, exact, psychological strikes that left an outsized impact. The Luftwaffe's structure, designed for predictable patterns and mass formations, began to crumble under the unpredictability of this new threat. From Berlin to Paris, from Oslo to Hamburg, the Mosquito's presence forced Germany to divert resources, redesign defenses, and reimagine its very understanding of aerial combat. The wooden wonder had achieved what no one expected. It made wood and glue into the cutting edge of warfare. It had become a weapon not of destruction alone, but of disruption, confusion, and moral complexity. And it was this blend of artistry and lethality that would soon reach its peak in one of the most audacious aerial operations of the war, a turning point where the Mosquito's legend was sealed forever. The night of the decisive strike was approaching, and every element, technology, leadership, courage, would converge in a single mission that changed how the world saw air power. Night falls over Europe. It is February 18, 1944. The wind off the North Sea carries the sharp scent of frost, and over the Norfolk coast, the black shapes of de Havilland mosquitoes gather like silent predators. The target? Berlin. Not the factories, not the suburbs tonight, the heart of the Reich itself. This operation, codenamed Steinhuder Meer, would be one of the most audacious intruder missions yet, aimed at crippling the German night fighter network and shattering its confidence. Inside the cockpit of each Mosquito, the hum of twin Merlins blends with the static of the radio. Their altimeters glow faintly, red and ghostly. Every man knows the risks. They are flying straight into the strongest air defense ring in the world. As the clock strikes 20-30 hours, the crews receive their orders. Bomb Berlin, maximum confusion. The words are brief, but their intent is profound. The Mosquitoes will fly ahead of the main bomber stream, mere minutes ahead, and strike airfields, control centers, and radar posts surrounding the capital. If they succeed, the Luftwaffe will be blinded, its interceptors delayed, its commanders forced into chaos. It is a plan of disruption, not destruction, but the psychological weight is immense. At 21:10, the first Mosquito lifts from RAF Wyton, its undercarriage folding neatly into the sleek wooden fuselage. One after another they vanish into the dark. Beneath them, Britain's coast fades to black. Over the channel, condensation trails glitter momentarily in moonlight before dissolving into mist. The pilots fly low, hugging the terrain, trusting the flicker of their navigation lights and the quiet voice of their navigators. 2 minutes to waypoint, one whispers, turning east. By midnight, they cross into German airspace. Below, the landscape lies frozen and silent, towns dimmed under blackout, rivers reflecting the faint glow of the stars. Then, far ahead, a searchlight pierces the horizon, followed by another. The night fighter network is alive and waiting. But the Mosquitoes have a weapon of their own, window. Bundles of metallic foil flutter out into the darkness, creating phantom echoes on enemy radar. On German scopes, the screens erupt with false signals. Controllers scramble, unsure where to send their fighters. Confusion spreads across the command net. At precisely 0002, the first Mosquito reaches Berlin. The crew dives through the haze, bomb bay doors open. Below them, anti-aircraft fire begins to claw at the sky, but the aircraft is already pulling up, engines roaring as the bombs fall cleanly into the heart of the city. The explosions ripple through the streets, timed so that they coincide with a scheduled address by Joseph Goebbels, the Reich's Minister of Propaganda. It is a calculated strike, symbolic, precise, and humiliating. Within minutes, the Mosquitoes are gone, their silhouettes lost in the cloud. Further west, another formation swoops low over Brunswick. They attack the airfield at Wunstorf, strafing runways, setting parked fighters ablaze. Others drop high-explosive canisters on radar stations, knocking out communications for miles. The German night fighter units scramble blindly, chasing illusions. Some are drawn into combat with decoy targets, others circle aimlessly over empty skies. The coordination that once defined the Luftwaffe's defensive grid disintegrates under the weight of uncertainty. On the ground, panic spreads. Commanders send conflicting orders. Intercept at Bremen. No Berlin. No Hanover. The once formidable Himmelbett defense system collapses into disorder. British bombers following behind, the lumbering Lancasters and Halifaxes sweep in under the cover of chaos. Their pathfinders, also flying Mosquitoes, mark the targets with crimson flares. From 20,000 feet, the crews below can see those lights gleaming through the smoke like spectral stars. The raid lasts less than 20 minutes. Yet in those minutes, the balance of night warfare shifts forever. German controllers record hundreds of radar contacts, most of them false. Dozens of night fighters are lost in accidents, collisions, or desperate evasions. The Mosquitoes, flying at speeds that make interception nearly impossible, return almost unscathed. When the last of them touches down in England in the early hours of the morning, mechanics are waiting on the frost-covered tarmac, counting every aircraft that returns. Nearly all make it home. As dawn breaks, reports begin to filter through. Berlin's central command station hit. Hanover's radar net disrupted. Multiple Luftwaffe airfields crippled. No Mosquito losses confirmed. Bomber Command has achieved what once seemed unattainable. A precision strike at the heart of Nazi air power, delivered by a handful of wooden aircraft. For the men who flew that night, exhaustion mixes with disbelief. They gather in the quiet of the debriefing room, hands still trembling from adrenaline. "We were over Berlin," one says softly, "and the flak never found us." Another adds, "It felt like we were untouchable." But they all know the truth. Luck played its part, as it always does in war. The Mosquito's speed saved them, but its success came from something deeper: planning, coordination, and faith in the improbable. Yet the mission's story is not over. Even as Britain celebrates the raid's triumph, the Luftwaffe begins plotting its retaliation. Somewhere in occupied France, radar crews recalibrate their instruments, engineers analyze debris, and night fighter pilots vow revenge. The skies over Europe are far from quiet. The next wave is already forming, and the Mosquito will soon face its most perilous test yet, one that will define its legend. March 31st, 1944. The chill of early spring grips the English countryside as engines rumble to life at RAF Hunsdon. Crews of 21, 464 and 487 squadrons gather beside their aircraft, sleek black-painted Mosquito FB-FAs, armed with bombs and cannon shells. Their target tonight is one of the most symbolic and heavily defended buildings in Nazi-occupied Europe, the Gestapo headquarters in Copenhagen. Intelligence reports reveal that Danish resistance members are being tortured inside. The mission, codenamed Operation Carthage, carries a chilling weight. If they fail, hundreds will die. If they succeed, so might civilians nearby. Precision will decide everything. At 10:20 a.m., under a gray sky streaked with drizzle, the first wave of mosquitoes takes off. Flying low, no higher than treetop level, they roar over the North Sea, their propellers carving twin white trails over the water. Inside each cockpit, silence reigns except for clipped navigation calls. The crews know this flight will demand every ounce of their skill. Their orders are to strike the building's lower floors, where Gestapo archives and cells are located, while avoiding the nearby Jeanne d'Arc School. At 360 miles per hour, with the margin for error measured in feet, even the smallest deviation could spell tragedy. The Danish coast rises ahead, flat farmland and patches of forest. Anti-aircraft guns wait on rooftops, but the mosquitoes approach so low they slip beneath radar. They thunder across fields, over church spires, and into the heart of Copenhagen. Civilians look up in shock as the wooden bombers flash overhead, their underbellies almost scraping the chimneys. The first formation lines up on the target, a massive stone complex in the city's Shellhus district. The leader, Flight Lieutenant Ted Sizemore, steadies his aircraft. Steady, steady. Bombs gone. The Mosquito leaps upward as two 500-pounders slam into the building. Flames erupt from the lower floors. The walls shudder, windows explode outward in shards. The following aircraft dive through the rising smoke, releasing their payloads with surgical precision. For a moment it seems the mission is flawless. Then fate intervenes. One Mosquito, hit by flak, clips a lamppost and crashes into a nearby street. The fire from the wreck spreads to the Jeanne d'Arc School. The crews behind, blinded by smoke, mistake the burning structure for the target and release their bombs. Within seconds, the school is engulfed. Nearly 90 children and teachers are killed. The radio crackles with frantic voices. "That's not the target! That's not the target!" But it's too late. The air is thick with debris and flame. Despite the disaster, the surviving Mosquitoes press on, determined to complete their mission. Their final bombs strike the Gestapo headquarters squarely, collapsing its upper floors and setting fire to the cell blocks below. Inside, prisoners seize the chaos as their chance for freedom. Danish resistance fighters burst through smoke and rubble, rescuing comrades and seizing documents before the remaining structure caves in. By noon, the Gestapo's Copenhagen command is gone, its archives destroyed, its chain of control shattered. As the Mosquitoes turn for home, the mood aboard is somber. The success is undeniable, but so is the cost. The crews fly in silence, knowing that the flames behind them mark both triumph and tragedy. When they land back in England hours later, no one speaks for a long time. Their debriefing officer's words are quiet, almost reverent. "You hit the target. You freed the prisoners, but you paid a terrible price." The Germans, furious at the attack, vow retribution. Yet their retaliation never truly materializes. The psychological blow is too great. The Gestapo loses vital intelligence networks in Denmark, and resistance operations surge. Across occupied Europe, the story of the wooden bombers spreads like wildfire, a tale of courage and consequence, told in whispers among those still fighting underground. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe reels from the cumulative pressure of constant Mosquito strikes. Every night brings new disruptions. Radar towers sabotaged, airfields burned, officers killed in their own headquarters. Even the mighty Me-262 jet fighters, the pride of German engineering, struggle to catch the elusive intruders. Reports describe Mosquitoes flying too high, too fast, vanishing before a lock can be achieved. It is as if the RAF had discovered a weapon that defies the limits of physics. The Mosquito's legend reaches its zenith in 1944 and early 1945. The night striking force, comprised entirely of Mosquito bombers, conducts precision raids deep inside Germany. They attack railway junctions, oil refineries, and communication hubs, often returning before the air raid sirens stop echoing. Their ability to strike, withdraw, and strike again leaves German defenses in disarray. In the closing months of the war, when cities burn and the Reich collapses, mosquitoes still fly, calm, swift, relentless. But behind every mission lies the quiet knowledge of fragility. The mosquito is fast, but not invincible. One burst of flak can splinter its wooden frame. One mistake in the dark can end 2 lives. Crews accept this with the fatalism of veterans. They fly not for glory but for precision, for the belief that every raid, however small, brings the war closer to its end. When Germany finally surrenders in May 1945, the Mosquito's engines fall silent. Its record stands unmatched: thousands of sorties, hundreds of daring missions, and a success rate that stunned both allies and enemies. Yet its legacy is not written in tonnage or kill counts. It is written in the transformation of warfare itself. That night over Copenhagen, in the smoke and sorrow of Operation Carthage, the Mosquito proved both the brilliance and the burden of human innovation. It was a machine born of desperation and intellect, capable of precision so fine it could change history, yet so fragile that one spark of error could ignite tragedy. The duality of that night defined not just the Mosquito, but the entire air war over Europe. And as the fires cooled, a new question began to rise. What had this wooden aircraft truly achieved, and at what cost? When the guns fell silent over Europe in May 1945, the war's debris covered every continent. But among the wreckage, the Mosquito's silhouette stood out as a symbol of what ingenuity could achieve under pressure. It had entered the conflict as an unapproved prototype, an experiment born from scarcity, and emerged as one of the most successful multi-role aircraft in the history of aviation. Its record was extraordinary. Over 39 variants produced, more than 7,700 built, and a mission success rate that rivaled any bomber or fighter in the Allied arsenal. Yet its true victory was not measured in numbers, but in what it changed in tactics, morale, and the very philosophy of air warfare. Bomber Command's leaders, once skeptical of light, unarmed aircraft, found themselves rewriting doctrine. The Mosquito had proven that speed and accuracy could achieve what mass bombing could not. Its pinpoint strikes crippled infrastructure, disrupted communications, and inflicted psychological wounds that heavy bombers could only hope to match through brute force. From Berlin to Oslo, from Amiens to Copenhagen, the Mosquito's raids demonstrated that warfare could be precise without losing its impact. The lessons learned from those missions would echo into the jet age and beyond. The Germans, for their part, never found a true countermeasure. Despite technological advances, the Luftwaffe's night fighters could rarely catch the Mosquito. The Bf-110s and Ju-88s, weighed down with radar equipment and armor, were simply too slow. Even the revolutionary Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter, struggled to intercept it in combat conditions. Its wooden construction made radar detection difficult, while its small silhouette and blistering climb rate left most pursuers grasping at contrails. The frustration this caused at the highest levels of German command became legendary. Hermann Göring's outbursts about the damned wooden plane were more than bluster. They reflected the Luftwaffe's helplessness in the face of ingenuity. Behind those victories, however, stood ordinary craftsmen. In small workshops across Britain and Canada, carpenters, furniture makers, and piano builders assembled the Mosquito's elegant frame. Many of them had never built an aircraft before. Women, too, formed a crucial part of the workforce, gluing panels, sanding fuselages, and ensuring each section fit perfectly. The Mosquito was not forged in factories of smoke and steel. It was born in the hum of saws, the smell of varnish, and the steady rhythm of hands that shaped wood into wings. It was a national effort that blended artistry with engineering, proof that even in war, creativity could triumph over constraint. For the men who flew it, the Mosquito left an indelible mark. Veterans described it with reverence. "The finest aircraft I ever flew," many said. They spoke of its responsiveness, its balance, the way it seemed alive in the pilot's hands. To sit in its cockpit, they said, was to feel part of something greater than metal and machinery. It was trust embodied in design. Many who survived the brutal air campaigns of 1943 and 1944 owed their lives to its speed. It carried them through storms of flak, through radar traps, and home through the darkness when slower aircraft never returned. But the Mosquito's aftermath was not one of unbroken triumph. The moral questions lingered long after the victory parades faded. Operations like the raid on Copenhagen forced commanders to confront the thin line between precision and tragedy. How much risk to civilians was justified in pursuit of liberation? Could moral intention outweigh collateral loss? In the decades that followed, historians would debate these missions endlessly, weighing heroism against heartbreak. Yet few questioned the skill, courage, and restraint of those who flew them. In the post-war years, as jet aircraft rose to dominance, the Mosquito's days were numbered. It continued to serve into the early 1950s, flying with reconnaissance and training units around the world. But its influence never disappeared. Engineers who had studied its wooden monocoque design would later apply those lessons to metal jets and even early composite aircraft. The principles that made it successful, lightness, efficiency, adaptability, became hallmarks of modern aviation. The war was over, but the Mosquito's legacy had only just begun to take flight. Its shadow stretched across a new era, one defined not by numbers of bombs, but by precision, intelligence, and speed. And yet, for those who had built and flown it, one question remained. What became of the world it had helped to win? And what did victory really mean for those who survived? In the months following Germany's surrender, the Mosquito's reputation spread far beyond the airfields of Britain. It became a legend whispered in airmen's messes and written about in post-war memoirs. To many, it symbolized the quiet defiance of a nation that had once stood alone. While the Lancaster and Spitfire embodied power and glory, the Mosquito represented intellect, a weapon of thought as much as of force. Aircrews from Canada, Australia, and New Zealand who had flown it under RAF command carried its story back home, where it inspired new generations of designers and pilots. The aircraft's performance had been so exceptional that it outlasted the war's technological curve. Even in 1945, few planes in the world could match its speed or versatility. Its production line continued for several years after the fighting ended. The Royal Air Force used it for reconnaissance over a shattered Europe, mapping the ruins of cities it had once bombed. It flew missions over occupied territories during the transition to peace, photographing roads, bridges, and military installations for reconstruction efforts. In the Far East, Mosquitoes served in Burma and Malaya, where their ability to operate from rough airstrips and in humid conditions made them invaluable. They became the eyes of empire and the wings of intelligence, carrying cameras instead of bombs. The same aircraft that had once burned cities now helped to rebuild them. By the late 1940s, however, the world of aviation was changing. Jet propulsion was rewriting the rules of flight. The Mosquito, despite its elegance, belonged to a vanishing era. Wood was giving way to aluminum and steel. Radar was becoming compact and powerful, and the speed barrier was being pushed beyond imagination. Yet the engineers who worked on early jet designs often cited the Mosquito as their teacher. Its aerodynamic lines, its monocoque structure, its emphasis on performance over armor, all these ideas reappeared in aircraft like the de Havilland Vampire and later the Venom and Comet. In many ways, the Mosquito was not replaced. It evolved. The legacy of its missions also endured in military doctrine. The concept of small, precise, high-speed strikes became the foundation for Cold War tactics. The idea that one could achieve maximum effect with minimal exposure, that speed and accuracy could outweigh sheer size, became gospel in the jet age. From reconnaissance jets to modern stealth aircraft, the philosophy that began with the Mosquito continued to shape the way wars would be fought in the sky. In the 21st century, when pilots guide drones or stealth bombers to pinpoint targets, they are, knowingly or not, following in the wake of those two-man crews who once raced through the dark over Berlin. For the Germans, the memory of the Mosquito lingered as both humiliation and grudging admiration. Captured examples were tested extensively by the Luftwaffe and later by Soviet engineers. Reports from these trials spoke of an aircraft of remarkable harmony, a rare acknowledgement of perfection from former enemies. Even decades later, Luftwaffe veterans who had fought against it admitted that it changed their view of air combat forever. "We could not catch it," one night fighter pilot recalled simply. "It came, it struck, it was gone, like a shadow." Back in Britain, many Mosquitoes were scrapped after the war, their wooden bodies burned or dismantled. Yet a few survived, in museums, in hangars, and in the memories of those who flew them. Restorers today speak of the difficulty and beauty of rebuilding one, of shaping the wood just as wartime craftsmen did, by hand and by instinct. Each surviving aircraft is more than a relic. It is a sculpture of ingenuity, a reminder of a time when intelligence and improvisation turned weakness into strength. As peace settled over Europe, the Mosquito became a quiet monument to the power of vision. It was born in a moment of desperation, when Britain lacked resources but refused to surrender. It proved that imagination could be a weapon as potent as fire, and though its engines have long gone silent, its spirit lives on in every design that values speed over size, elegance over excess, and precision over destruction. Its story does not end with victory parades or medals. It ends in the soft hum of memory, the echo of twin Merlins fading into a dawn sky, a sound that once carried the weight of defiance across a world at war. In the long quiet after the war, when Europe rebuilt from ashes and skies grew peaceful once more, the legend of the Mosquito endured, not as a tale of destruction, but as a testament to human ingenuity. It was proof that brilliance often rises from desperation. When Britain was starved of aluminum, when enemy bombers darkened its cities, when logic said there was no room left for innovation, engineers and craftsmen turned to wood, the simplest of materials, and created an aircraft that outflew the very machines designed to destroy it. It was a victory of imagination over convention, of craftsmanship over mass production. The Mosquito story reminds us that war, for all its cruelty, has always been a mirror of humanity's contradictions. It was beautiful yet deadly, fragile yet fearless, built by artists to wage destruction. Its wooden frame carried not only bombs and cameras, but the weight of a nation's will to survive. Every mission it flew was a paradox, precision and peril intertwined. It liberated prisoners, shattered command centers, and inspired hope in the oppressed, yet sometimes brought tragedy to the innocent. That duality is what gives its legacy depth, not as a perfect weapon, but as a profoundly human one. In the decades that followed, as jet engines roared and the world reached toward the stars, the Mosquito's influence lingered quietly in the lines of new aircraft and in the doctrines of modern air power. Speed, agility, precision. These became the new virtues of warfare, and all could be traced back to the wooden wonder. Its lessons outlasted its frame. Even today, when drones strike with silent accuracy and stealth fighters vanish from radar, the ghost of the Mosquito still flies within them, the original shape of intelligent warfare. History will remember the Mosquito not merely as a machine, but as an idea, that courage and creativity can coexist, that innovation can emerge from scarcity, and that sometimes the simplest materials can bear the greatest strength. In a world rebuilt from ruins, the echo of its twin engines still speaks softly through time, a reminder that victory does not always belong to the heaviest weapon, but to the sharpest mind.